You have been wasting money every single spring, and the garden center knows it. The average American gardener spends between $300 and $600 every April buying flowers that are biologically designed to die before winter arrives. Every single one of them. Gone by October. And you are back at that register the following spring doing it all over again. That stops today. There are 9 perennial flowers that you plant exactly once, and they come back every single year, fuller, stronger, and more breathtaking than the year before. Some of them will still be blooming in your garden 50 years from now. Stay with me, because plant number 6 is going to completely change how you think about your garden forever. Perennial number 1, Black-Eyed Susan. Black-Eyed Susan produces flowers with bright golden yellow petals surrounding a deep, rich chocolate brown center. That color contrast is not subtle. It commands attention from across the yard. It photographs beautifully, and it holds its color even in the intense afternoon sun that would bleach the petals off lesser plants. It grows between 2 and 3 feet tall, upright, confident, and structural enough to anchor a bed without needing staking or support. Most perennials give you 4 to 6 weeks of flowers. Black-Eyed Susan blooms from late June all the way through October. That is 4 solid months of color running through the heat of summer and straight into fall when most other plants have already given up. In many parts of the country, you will still have fresh flowers on these plants when the first light frost arrives. It grows in full sun, minimum 6 hours of direct sunlight daily, and it genuinely does not care what your soil looks like. Poor soil, clay soil, sandy soil, compacted soil that other plants refuse to touch. Black-Eyed Susan handles all of it without complaint. The soil pH range is 6.0 to 7.0, slightly acidic to neutral, which covers the natural soil pH of the vast majority of American gardens without any amendment needed. And once it is established, which typically takes 1 full growing season, it is genuinely drought tolerant. If you travel during summer, if you forget to water, if your region goes through dry stretches, this plant keeps blooming through all of it. The USDA hardiness zones for Black-Eyed Susan are zones 3 through 9, from Minnesota and Maine all the way down to Texas and Florida. If you are in zone 3 through 9, this plant will survive your winters and come back stronger every spring without any special protection. Black-Eyed Susan self-seeds, reliably, generously, and without any help from you. If you leave the seed heads standing through fall and winter, which you absolutely should, the seeds drop into the surrounding soil and germinate the following spring. Your original planting quietly expands outward on its own, filling in surrounding areas, covering bare ground, and producing new plants that you never paid for and never had to plant. And while those seeds are sitting in the seed heads waiting to drop, goldfinches and sparrows are clinging to those stems and feeding directly from them through January and February when every other food source in your yard is gone. If you are in zones 8 and 9, the deep south, the southwest, parts of Southern California, plant your Black-Eyed Susans in a location that receives some afternoon shade. The intensity of summer heat in those regions without any relief can shorten the bloom window. Morning sun and afternoon shade in zones 8 and 9 gives you the longest possible bloom period and keeps the plants from going into heat stress during the hottest weeks of July and August. The care instruction that most people get wrong with this plant is deadheading. Most gardeners remove every spent flower because they think it keeps the garden looking tidy. Do not do that. Remove some spent flowers, the ones you can easily reach, to encourage the plant to keep producing new buds, but leave a significant portion of the seed heads standing. Those are not dead flowers. Those are a winter pantry for the birds in your yard and next year's free plants already in progress. A garden that supports wildlife through every season is a garden that feels alive even in the coldest months. Black-Eyed Susan makes that possible without asking anything extra from you. Perennial number 2, Salvia. Stop right here before we go any further, because if you have ever bought salvia as an annual at a garden center and watched it bloom for a few weeks before declining, what you bought was not this plant. The annual salvia sold in most garden centers is a completely different species. The perennial salvia I am describing right now blooms not once, not twice, but 3 times in a single growing season, and it comes back and does it again every year for the rest of your gardening life. Perennial salvia produces deep violet to purple flower spikes on strong, upright stems that grow 18 to 24 inches tall. The color is among the most saturated and jewel-toned of any perennial available. It does not fade in heat, it does not wash out in bright sunlight. It holds that rich, intense purple from the moment the flowers open until the moment you cut it back. And the compact mounding growth habit makes it perfect for the front or middle of any border, tidy enough to look intentional, substantial enough to make a real visual impact. It blooms first in late spring. Then you cut it back hard, down to 4 to 6 inches from the ground, and within 3 weeks a fresh set of stems emerges and a full second flush of bloom follows in midsummer. Cut it back again, and many plants produce a third flush in early fall. 3 bloom cycles from a single plant in a single season. No other commonly available perennial delivers that kind of value for the space it occupies. Perennial salvia needs full sun, 6 or more hours daily, and well-draining soil. It does not tolerate standing water or consistently wet conditions. The pH range is 5.5 to 7.0, and it is highly drought-tolerant once established, making it one of the most water-efficient perennials you can grow. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8. This plant is genuinely deer-resistant, not deer tolerance in the sense that deer occasionally leave it alone. Actually, reliably resistant, because the aromatic foliage that smells wonderful to you is deeply unappealing to deer. If you are gardening in a region with significant deer pressure, and if you're in zones 5 through 7 across the Mid-Atlantic, the Midwest, or the Northeast, you almost certainly are, perennial salvia gives you that rich, vibrant color without the heartbreak of watching it get eaten overnight. If you are not subscribed to this channel yet, I want to ask you something genuinely. Where else are you getting this level of specific, zone-accurate, actionable gardening information for free? Think about that for a second. This is here every single week. Hit that subscribe button right now. You have nothing to lose and an entire garden's worth of knowledge to gain. Perennial number 3, coneflower. There is a plant growing in American gardens right now that native communities used medicinally for centuries before a single garden center ever existed. It attracts monarch butterflies, swallowtail butterflies, goldfinches, and bees, all simultaneously, all season long. It blooms for 4 straight months without deadheading, without fertilizing, and without any special attention from you. And it does all of this in soil that would kill most other flowering plants outright. That plant is coneflower, and if it is not already in your garden, that changes today. Coneflower produces distinctive daisy-shaped flowers with swept-back petals surrounding a raised, dome-shaped center that starts green, deepens to bronze, and becomes more architecturally interesting as the season progresses. The petal colors available today go far beyond the original purple. You can find coneflowers in warm orange, deep red, soft pink, pure white, golden yellow, and rich magenta. Every color works in almost every garden setting because the raised central cone gives every variety that same unmistakable silhouette that reads clearly from a distance and holds its visual interest even after the petals drop. It grows between 2 and 5 feet tall, depending on the variety you choose. Shorter, compact varieties for the front and middle of borders, taller varieties for the back, where they create genuine structural presence. And it blooms from July straight through October, 4 months, right through the heart of American summer and deep into fall when most of the garden is winding down and color becomes genuinely precious. Full sun to light shade, tolerates clay soil, sandy soil, and poor unamended soil that most flowering perennials would refuse to grow in. Soil pH of 6.0 to 7.0, moderate drought tolerance once established. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9, the same exceptional range as Black-Eyed Susan, covering virtually every gardener in the continental United States. The seed heads that form after the petals drop in late summer and fall are more ecologically valuable than the flowers themselves. American goldfinches, those brilliant yellow birds that disappear from many yards in late summer, are drawn back specifically by coneflower seed heads. They cling to the dried stems and feed directly from the seed cones through fall and all the way through winter. If you cut your coneflowers down in fall cleanup, you are removing one of the most critical winter food sources available to the birds in your yard. Leave them standing, every single one. The architectural quality of those dried seed heads with frost on them in January is genuinely beautiful, and the wildlife activity around them through the coldest months makes your garden feel alive in a way that a cleaned-up bare bed never will. The care instruction that costs most coneflower growers their best results is cutting the plants down in fall rather than early spring. Leave the entire plant standing through winter. The stem structure protects the crown of the plant from the repeated freeze-thaw cycles that cause more perennial winter damage than the cold itself. Cut back in late February or very early March, after the worst of winter is past, but before new growth begins pushing up from the base. That timing gives you maximum wildlife benefit through winter and maximum plant health going into spring. Perennial number 4, Daylily. This next plant is growing in abandoned lots across America right now. It is growing along roadsides that nobody tends. It is growing around the foundations of houses that have been empty for years. Nobody is watering it, nobody is fertilizing it, nobody is doing anything for it at all. And it comes back every single spring and blooms as reliably and as beautifully as it did the first year it was planted. That is the single most honest description of how tough a daylily is. And when you give this plant even basic attention, the right location, decent soil, occasional division, it repays you with a performance that will genuinely surprise you every summer for the rest of your life. Daylily produces trumpet-shaped blooms in a color range that covers nearly the entire spectrum: orange, yellow, red, pink, burgundy, lavender, cream, and complex bicolors that combine 2 or 3 of those shades in a single flower. The one color daylilies do not come in is true blue. Every other color exists somewhere in the thousands of named daylily varieties available to American gardeners today. Each individual flower lasts exactly 1 day, which is where the name comes from. But each flowering stem carries multiple buds that open sequentially over a period of several weeks. While one flower closes, another opens. The display is continuous rather than all at once, which means a single established clump gives you weeks of color, rather than a brief, spectacular burst followed by nothing. The grass-like foliage that remains after blooming is dense enough to suppress weeds in the surrounding soil, which means daylilies are doing active work for your garden even during the weeks they are not flowering. They grow 1 to 4 feet tall depending on variety, with full sun to partial shade tolerance that makes them one of the most placement-flexible perennials available. Soil pH 6.0 to 6.5, moderate water needs, and USDA hardiness zones 3 through 10, the widest hardiness range of any plant on this entire list. If you were gardening anywhere in the continental United States, daylilies will survive your winters. A single daylily clump that you plant this spring will double in size every 2 to 3 years as the root system expands and produces new fans of growth. Within 5 years, that one original clump contains enough plant material to divide into 8 to 12 individual plants. Each of those divisions can be replanted throughout your yard or given to neighbors, family members, or friends who want to start their own. The initial purchase price of one plant, typically $8 to $15 at a garden center, becomes effectively zero over time because you are continuously generating new plants from the original investment at no additional cost. This is the closest thing to a genuinely free garden that the perennial world offers. Division is also the key to keeping daylilies performing at their peak. When a clump becomes overcrowded, typically every 3 to 5 years, the center of the clump starts to produce fewer flowers, while the outer edges remain vigorous. That is your signal to divide. Dig up the entire clump in early spring or early fall. Use a sharp spade to separate it into sections of 3 to 5 fans each and replant those divisions immediately. Each section will establish quickly and bloom the following season. Skip division for too long, and you get declining flower production from a plant that is fully capable of spectacular results, simply because it needs more room than you have given it. The single care mistake that costs daylily growers the most is removing the foliage immediately after the bloom period ends. Leave it in place through fall. Those leaves are actively photosynthesizing after the flowers are gone, sending energy back down into the root system and building the reserves that fuel next year's bloom display. Cut the foliage back after the first hard frost in fall, not before. Every week of foliage you remove early is energy that never makes it back to the roots. Perennial number 5, garden phlox. If you have ever walked past a summer garden at dusk and suddenly stopped because a fragrance hit you that you could not immediately identify, something rich and sweet and unmistakably floral, there is a strong chance what you were smelling was garden phlox. This plant produces a scent strong enough to carry across an entire yard on a warm July evening, and the flowers that produce it are among the most visually striking of any summer perennial available to American gardeners. Garden phlox produces large, rounded flower clusters, sometimes called panicles, in shades of deep pink, soft pink, white, lavender, red, and bicolors that combine a colored edge with a contrasting eye at the center of each individual floret. The clusters are substantial, often 6 to 8 inches across on established plants, sitting on top of stems that grow 3 to 4 feet tall. This is a back-of-border plant. It creates genuine vertical presence and commands the eye from the moment it comes into bloom in July. And it blooms from July through September, right through the heart of the American summer growing season when temperatures are at their highest and many other perennials have already stopped flowering and retreated into their late-season holding pattern. Garden phlox keeps going through all of it. Full sun, 6 hours minimum, more is better, moist, well-draining, fertile soil, soil pH 6.0 to 7.0, consistent moisture through the growing season, USDA hardiness zones 4 through 8. Now, here is the ecological value of garden phlox that most gardeners completely overlook when they are choosing plants. Garden phlox is one of the most powerful hummingbird attractants available to American gardeners in zones 4 through 8. The tubular structure of the individual florets and the color range, particularly the pinks and reds, are precisely what hummingbirds are biologically designed to feed from. An established garden phlox planting in full bloom from July through September brings hummingbirds reliably and repeatedly through the peak of their activity period and right through their fall migration southward. If attracting hummingbirds to your yard is something you have been trying to accomplish with hummingbird feeders and not quite achieving, plant garden phlox. The flowers are more reliable than any feeder because they're always available and always fresh. The care instruction that makes the biggest single difference in garden phlox performance is one that most gardeners are afraid to follow because it seems too aggressive. In spring, when the new stems emerge from the base of the plant, thin them down to 5 or 6 of the strongest, most vigorous stems per clump. Remove everything else. Cut it right down to the ground. Most gardeners leave every stem that emerges because more stems feels like more flowers. What it actually produces is overcrowding, poor air circulation between stems, and powdery mildew, the white, dusty fungal coating that is the most common problem with garden phlox, and the one that makes plants look terrible by August. 5 strong stems with good air movement between them produce healthier plants, larger flower clusters, and a significantly longer bloom period than 15 crowded weak stems ever will. Thin aggressively in spring, and your garden phlox will perform at a level that makes it one of the best plants in your entire yard. If you are watching this video and you are finding real value in this information, specific, zone-accurate, practical advice that tells you not just what to plant, but exactly how to get the best possible results from each plant, then I need to ask you something directly. Are you subscribed to this channel yet? Because if you're not, you're going to finish watching this video and move on, and the next one, which is going to be just as detailed and just as useful as this one, is going to come out next week and you're going to miss it entirely. That is a choice you do not have to make. Hit subscribe right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it means every video I put out from this point forward comes directly to you automatically. Do not let good information slip past you because you forgot to press one button. Perennial number 6, Russian Sage. Russian sage produces silvery white aromatic stems completely covered in tiny lavender blue flowers from midsummer through fall. The overall effect is an airy, luminous cloud of blue-silver color that moves in the slightest breeze and catches light in a way that makes it look almost iridescent in the late afternoon sun. It grows 3 to 5 feet tall, a dramatic vertical presence that creates the kind of sophisticated, professional-looking garden backdrop that most home gardeners spend years trying to achieve. And it blooms from July all the way through the first hard frost, making it one of the longest blooming and latest season perennials available in American horticulture. Full sun, this plant demands it completely and rewards it fully. Poor to average well-draining soil. Do not enrich it. Do not amend it with compost or fertilizer. Soil pH 6.0 to 8.0, one of the most alkaline-tolerant ranges of any perennial on this list, which makes it genuinely valuable for gardeners in the West and Midwest, where naturally alkaline soils make growing many flowering perennials difficult. Extremely drought-tolerant once established. USDA hardiness zones 4 through 9. Here is the fact about Russian sage that completely changes how you need to approach growing it. And it is the fact that explains why so many gardeners buy this plant, put it in their best prepared garden bed, and then wonder why it looks floppy and weak and disappointing instead of the dramatic specimen they saw in every photo. Russian sage thrives in poor soil. Not average soil, poor soil. Lean, dry, unamended ground. The plants you see performing magnificently in professional landscape plantings, those towering 4- and 5-foot specimens with perfect upright structure and massive quantities of bloom, are almost always growing in soil that has never been enriched, fertilized, or heavily amended. When you plant Russian sage in rich, fertile, heavily composted soil, it puts all of its energy into producing lush, soft growth that cannot support its own weight. Floppy, weak stems that need staking, reduced bloom, exactly the opposite of what you want. Plant it in your worst, leanest, most neglected soil and watch it perform at its absolute best. For gardeners in zones 8 and 9 across the South and Southwest, this plant is one of your most valuable options. Russian sage handles sustained summer heat, periods of genuine drought, and the kind of brutal July and August conditions that eliminate most other perennials from consideration in those regions. In climates where most flowering perennials struggle through summer, Russian sage is actively at its peak. Now, right here, I want to stop and ask you something directly. Out of the 6 plants we have covered so far, Black-Eyed Susan, Salvia, Coneflower, Daylily, Garden Phlox, and Russian sage, which one are you most excited to try in your garden this season? And tell me your USDA zone when you answer. Drop both in the comments right now. I read every single one, and I genuinely want to know where this community is gardening and what you are most drawn to growing. Your answer might also shape what I cover in upcoming videos, so your comment actually matters beyond just this conversation. Perennial number 7, Bleeding Heart. There is a spot in almost every American yard that defeats gardeners completely. The shaded area under a large tree. The north-facing side of the house where direct sunlight never reaches. The dark corner between 2 structures where nothing seems to want to grow and everything you have tried has either limped along miserably or simply died. You have probably stood in that spot and stared at it and wondered whether anything beautiful could ever actually grow there. Bleeding Heart was made for exactly that spot. This plant produces flowers so visually distinctive that the first time most people see them in bloom, they stop and genuinely stare. Arching stems, graceful and gently weeping like nature designed them with a specific elegance in mind, hung with perfectly formed heart-shaped flowers in deep rose pink, with a small white inner petal that drops below the heart like a single suspended teardrop. It grows 2 to 3 feet tall with a graceful, arching, slightly weeping habit that spreads gently outward as the plant matures. It blooms in April and May, arriving earlier than most perennials have fully woken up, filling the spring garden with color at the exact moment when gardeners are most hungry for it after a long winter. Partial to full shade, moist, humus-rich, well-draining soil. Soil pH 6.0 to 7.0. Consistent moisture, particularly through the spring flowering period. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. Bleeding Heart goes summer dormant. In warm climates, zones 6 through 9 particularly, as summer heat builds through June and July, the foliage of bleeding heart begins to yellow, decline, and eventually disappear entirely. The plant vanishes. The ground where it was growing looks empty, and every gardener who does not know this is coming responds the same way. They assume the plant has died, and they dig up the spot to replant it. That is the single most common and most costly mistake made with this plant across the country. The plant has not died. The root system is completely alive underground, resting through the heat of summer exactly the way it is biologically designed to do. It will return on schedule the following spring with complete reliability. What you need to do is plan for the empty space it leaves behind. Plant bleeding heart alongside hostas, ferns, astilbe, or any other shade-tolerant perennial whose foliage expands and fills in through early summer, covering the space bleeding heart vacates and keeping that area of your garden looking full and intentional through the warmest months. One care note that applies across every zone. Do not disturb bleeding heart once it is planted and established. Do not move it, do not divide it unless the clump has become genuinely overcrowded after many years. This plant establishes a deep, specific root relationship with the soil it is growing in, and it performs best when left exactly where you put it. Every time you dig it up and relocate it, you set it back significantly. Choose the right location before you plant, the right shade exposure, the right moisture level, and then commit to it completely. Perennial number 8, catmint. Catmint produces soft lavender blue flower spikes rising above mounding gray-green aromatic foliage. The overall effect is soft and billowing, a gentle cloud of blue lavender color that moves beautifully with any movement of air and works harmoniously with virtually every other plant color in the garden. It grows 12 to 24 inches tall depending on the variety, compact enough to sit at the front of any border, substantial enough to make a real visual contribution. The foliage itself is attractive even when the plant is not blooming. Silver green, pleasantly textured, and aromatic in a way that makes brushing past it a genuinely sensory experience. Full sun to light shade, well-draining soil. This is the one non-negotiable growing requirement for catmint, as it does not tolerate standing water or consistently wet conditions. Soil pH 6.0 to 8.0, an unusually wide and forgiving range that accommodates the naturally alkaline soils common across large parts of the Midwest and West without any amendment. Drought tolerant once established, genuinely so, not just tolerant of briefly dry conditions, but capable of thriving through extended dry periods that would stress most other flowering perennials. USDA hardiness zones 3 through 8. Now, let me be completely clear about something that confuses a significant number of gardeners the first time they encounter catmint. This is not catnip. They are related plants in the same family, but catmint, Nepeta racemosa specifically, does not produce the chemical compound that causes the behavioral response in cats that catnip does. Your cats will not roll in it, destroy it, or seek it out the way they would a catnip plant. What catmint will do instead is attract bees in numbers that will genuinely stop you in your tracks the first time you see it in full bloom. And that concentrated pollinator activity does not stay contained to the catmint. It spills over into every other flowering plant in your surrounding garden, increasing pollination rates and fruit and seed set across everything growing nearby. If you grow vegetables anywhere near your ornamental garden, catmint makes them more productive. That is not a small benefit. The care technique that delivers everything catmint is capable of is aggressive cutting back after each bloom flush. When the first flush of bloom fades in June, cut the entire plant back to approximately 4 inches from the ground. Not a light trim, not a gentle shaping, cut it back hard. It will look severe for about a week and a half. Then new growth will push up from the base rapidly, and within 3 weeks you will have a fresh, dense mound of foliage. Within 5 to 6 weeks, you will have a full second flush of bloom, as rich and abundant as the first. Cut it back again after that second bloom fades, and you will frequently get a third bloom period in early fall. 3 complete bloom cycles from May through September. Skip the cutback because it looks too drastic, and you get 1 weakening bloom period that fades into straggly, tired growth by July. The choice is entirely yours, but now you know what the choice actually costs you. Perennial number 9, Baptisia. This is the most underplanted perennial in America. Professional garden designers know about it, Botanical garden curators know about it, horticulturalists know about it, but the average American home gardener has never encountered it, never heard its name, and has no idea what they have been missing. By the time this segment ends, that changes for you permanently. Baptisia produces tall, upright flower spikes of deep indigo blue, a true, saturated, remarkable blue that is genuinely rare in the flowering perennial world in May and June, bridging the seasonal gap between spring bulbs and the main summer perennial bloom period. The flowers are reminiscent of lupins in their structure, pea-shaped florets arranged in dense vertical spikes, but Baptisia is significantly tougher, longer-lived, and more adaptable than lupins across the range of American climates. The blue-green foliage that follows the flowers is dense, attractive, and weed-suppressing through the entire growing season, giving you a plant that earns its space in the garden every single month it is in the ground. And after the flowers fade, the seed pods that form are unlike anything else in the perennial garden. Inflated, charcoal black, almost architectural in their structure, rattling audibly in the breeze and providing genuine ornamental interest through fall and into winter. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall and spreads to an equal width at maturity, a genuine structural presence that anchors a garden bed with the kind of permanence and authority that no annual flower can ever create. Full sun to light shade, average to poor, well-draining soil, like Russian sage, Baptisia actively performs better in lean soil than in heavily enriched garden beds. Soil pH 5.5 to 7.0, drought-tolerant once fully established, USDA hardiness zones 3 through 9. Baptisia is a nitrogen fixer. Like beans and peas in the vegetable garden, Baptisia forms a symbiotic relationship with specific soil bacteria that allows it to pull nitrogen directly from the air and deposit it into the surrounding soil in a form that neighboring plants can access and use. Planting Baptisia does not just add a beautiful and structurally important perennial to your garden, it actively improves the soil chemistry in the surrounding bed over time, making the growing conditions measurably better for every other plant within its root zone. You are adding beauty and improving your soil simultaneously with a single planting decision. Baptisia takes 3 full years to reach its flowering potential. Year 1, it establishes its root system underground and produces modest top growth. Year 2, it grows larger, but still does not give you its full bloom display. Year 3, if you have left it completely undisturbed, have not moved it, have not divided it, have not lost patience and dug it up, it produces a bloom display that will make every single day of waiting feel like the most worthwhile patience you have ever exercised in your garden. And then it does it again the following year, and the year after that. Baptisia plants 20, 30, and 40 years old are documented across the country, still flowering reliably, still anchoring their gardens with the same structural presence they established decades earlier, never having been replaced or significantly divided. Do not dig it up in year 2. That is the only instruction that truly matters with this plant. Leave it alone, give it 3 years, and it will give you the rest of its very long life in return. You can choose every plant on this list correctly. You can match every one to the right zone, the right sun exposure, the right spacing. You can do all of that with complete accuracy and still fail entirely if you skip this step or rush through it carelessly. Soil preparation is not the exciting part of gardening. Nobody films themselves amending soil and get millions of views, but it is the single step that separates gardens that perform from gardens that disappoint. And it is the step that most beginners underestimate and most experienced gardeners wish they had taken more seriously earlier in their gardening lives. Work your soil to a depth of 12 inches minimum before planting any perennial. Not 6 inches, not whatever depth your trowel reaches comfortably, 12 inches. Because perennial root systems go deep and they need loose, uncompacted soil to do it efficiently. Roots that hit compacted soil at 6 inches stop growing downward and start circling. Circling roots produce unstable, drought-vulnerable, underperforming plants. Loose, deep soil produces the expansive, anchored root systems that make perennials the long-lived powerhouses they're capable of being. Add 3 to 4 inches of quality compost worked into the top 8 inches of that loosened soil. This single amendment does more for your garden than any fertilizer, any pesticide, or any other product you could purchase.
In clay soil, common across the Midwest, the Southeast, and large parts of the Northeast, compost improves drainage and loosens the dense structure that suffocates roots. In sandy soil, common across the Southwest, the Southeast, and coastal regions, compost improves water retention and gives roots something to grip. In average loam soil, compost feeds the soil biology that feeds your plants through the slow, steady release of nutrients across the entire growing season. If you are planting in fall, which is the ideal planting time for perennials in zones 5 through 8 because it allows root establishment before winter and produces earlier, stronger growth the following spring, the compost you work in has all winter to integrate fully into the soil structure before those roots begin actively expanding. If you are planting in spring, amend immediately before planting rather than weeks ahead. Freshly amended spring soil has enough biological activity to begin benefiting roots almost immediately. Dig each planting hole twice as wide as the root ball of the plant and slightly shallower than its depth. That wider diameter gives roots immediate access to loosened, amended soil in every direction they grow. The slightly shallow depth is critical. The crown of every perennial on this list needs to sit at or just barely above the surrounding soil level. A crown buried even an inch too deep is a crown sitting in conditions that promote rot, disease, and decline. When in doubt, plant slightly high rather than slightly deep. Settling will bring it down to the right level naturally over the first few weeks. Before placing the plant in the hole, loosen the root ball with your fingers, particularly if the plant has been in its nursery pot long enough for roots to begin circling the bottom. Roots that have been growing in a circular pattern inside a container will continue that circular growth pattern after planting unless you physically redirect them outward. Spend 60 seconds loosening and spreading those roots before the plant goes in the ground. That 60 seconds directly determines how quickly and how extensively that plant establishes in its new location. Water deeply and slowly immediately after planting, not a quick spray across the surface, but a slow, thorough soaking that penetrates the full depth of the root ball and the surrounding amended soil. For the first 4 to 6 weeks after planting, water once weekly if rainfall does not provide it. This is the establishment window. The root system is actively expanding into the surrounding soil during this period, and consistent moisture is what enables that expansion to happen at the rate the plant needs to be ready for its first winter or its first summer heat, depending on when you planted. After that establishment window closes, transition to deep and infrequent watering rather than frequent shallow watering. Once every 10 to 14 days during dry periods, watering slowly enough to penetrate 8 to 10 inches into the soil. Deep watering trains roots to grow downward toward reliable moisture rather than staying near the surface where they're vulnerable to drought and temperature extremes. Surface-watered perennials have shallow root systems that struggle through summer. Deep-watered perennials have the kind of extensive, anchored root systems that make them genuinely drought-tolerant after a full season of establishment.
Mulch 2 to 3 inches deep around every plant after planting. Mulch suppresses weeds that compete for moisture and nutrients, moderates soil temperature through both summer heat and winter cold, and slows moisture evaporation from the soil surface during dry periods. But maintain one absolute rule with mulching that most gardeners violate constantly without realizing the damage it causes. Never pile mulch directly against the stem or crown of any plant. Leave a clear circle of unmulched soil 2 inches wide around the base of every plant. Mulch piled against stems traps moisture against the crown, which creates the persistently damp conditions that promote crown rot and fungal disease, the two most common causes of perennial failure that gardeners blame on the plant when the actual cause is how they mulched it. For gardeners in zones 9 through 11, Florida, coastal and southern Texas, southern California, Hawaii, your establishment watering schedule needs to be more aggressive than the standard guidance. Heat in those regions accelerates moisture loss from both soil and plant tissue at a rate that the once-weekly establishment watering cannot keep pace with. Water newly planted perennials twice weekly through the first 4 to 6 weeks of establishment in those zones. After that window closes, the deep, infrequent watering approach applies across every zone equally. One of the most common reasons gardeners give up on perennials is not the plants themselves. It is not even the soil preparation or the zone matching. It is simply not knowing what to do at each point in the gardening year, and either doing the wrong thing at the wrong time
or doing nothing at all when something specific was needed. Here's your complete year-round care calendar for every plant on this list. Follow this and you will get the best possible results from every perennial you grow. In spring, which means late February through April depending on your zone, with Zone 9 and 10 gardeners starting earliest and Zone 3 and 4 gardeners starting latest, cut back any stems you left standing through winter down to 2 to 3 inches from the ground. New growth will already be pushing up from the base by the time you do this in most zones, making it easy to identify exactly where the living plant begins. Divide overcrowded clumps of daylilies, coneflowers, catmint, black-eyed Susans, and garden phlox if they showed declining flower production the previous season, or if the center of the clump looks sparse while the outer edges remain vigorous. Early spring division before significant top growth develops gives divisions the entire growing season to establish before their first winter. Apply a 1-inch layer of compost around every plant as a natural slow-release fertilizer for the coming season. Do not use high-nitrogen synthetic fertilizer on flowering perennials. High nitrogen produces lush, heavy foliage growth at the direct expense of flower production, which is the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. And do not divide Baptisia, Russian sage, or bleeding heart. These three perform significantly better left completely undisturbed. Through summer, June, July, August, deadhead coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, salvia, and catmint consistently to extend bloom periods and encourage new bud production. Cut catmint and salvia back hard after each bloom flush. This is the non-negotiable technique that delivers their full multi-flush bloom potential and is not optional if you want maximum performance. Water deeply during dry stretches, focusing water delivery at the root zone rather than overhead. Overhead watering on garden phlox specifically creates the leaf surface moisture that powdery mildew requires to establish. If powdery mildew appears on your garden phlox, improve air circulation immediately by removing some of the interior stems and switch to ground-level watering only. In fall, September through November, leave coneflower and black-eyed Susan seed heads completely standing for wildlife through winter. Cut back garden phlox, daylilies, and bleeding heart after the first hard frost signals the end of the growing season. Apply 2 to 3 inches of mulch over the crowns of any perennials in zones 4 and 5 before the ground freezes. This insulation layer prevents the repeated freeze-thaw cycles that heave roots out of the soil and cause more winter damage than the cold temperatures themselves. Do not fertilize anything in fall. Fall fertilization stimulates tender new growth that has no time to harden off before frost arrives and is damaged or killed by the first hard freeze.
Through winter, leave ornamental seed heads and structural stems standing for as long as birds are actively using them. Use the quieter months to plan any additions, divisions, or redesigns you want to implement in spring. Order new plants from mail-order nurseries in January and February. The selection available through mail order is significantly wider than what most local nurseries carry, and the best varieties sell out early in the season before most gardeners have started thinking about spring planting. Here is the planning mistake that even experienced gardeners make repeatedly. They choose perennials based on what looks beautiful at the nursery on the day they visit, which means they are choosing based on what is currently blooming at the nursery on that specific day, and they end up with a garden where everything peaks simultaneously for 3 spectacular weeks and then produces almost nothing for the remaining 5 months of the growing season. Bloom succession planning solves that problem completely, and with the 9 plants we have covered today, you have everything you need to build a garden that produces continuous color from April through October without any gaps. Bleeding Heart and Baptisia arrive first, April and May, delivering color to the spring garden at the exact moment when gardeners are most eager for it after winter. The deep indigo of Baptisia spikes and the hanging rose-pink hearts of Bleeding Heart together create a spring display that bridges the end of bulb season and the beginning of the main perennial season without a visible transition gap. Salvia and catmint come into their first flush in late May and June, carrying the garden forward from spring into early summer with that rich violet-purple and lavender-blue color combination that works with everything planted around it. Their first flush overlaps with the tail end of Baptisia bloom, creating a seamless color handoff between the spring and summer seasons. Coneflower, black-eyed Susan, daylily, and garden phlox define the midsummer peak, July and August, when the garden is at its most active, its most colorful, and its most alive with pollinator activity. These four plants together at peak bloom create the kind of summer garden display that makes visitors stop and ask questions. This is the high season, and these plants deliver it with minimal maintenance required during the hottest and often busiest months of the year. Russian sage carries the garden from late summer into fall, August through October, providing that luminous blue-silver color at the exact time when most summer perennials are winding down and the garden needs something to carry it gracefully toward the end of the season. Paired with the continuing bloom of catmint's third flush and the ornamental seed heads of coneflower and black-eyed Susan, the fall garden looks intentional and abundant rather than tired and depleted. Plant in odd numbers, groups of 3 or 5, rather than single plants or pairs. Grouped plantings create the kind of natural-looking drifts that read clearly from a distance and give the garden a designed quality that single specimen plantings never achieve. Place shorter plants at the front, catmint, salvia, shorter daylily varieties. Medium-height plants in the middle, coneflower, black-eyed Susan, standard daylilies, bleeding heart. Taller plants at the back, garden phlox, Russian sage, baptisia. Repeat the same plant in multiple locations throughout a bed rather than concentrating it all in one spot. Repetition creates visual rhythm and makes a garden look planned and coherent rather than randomly assembled. For gardeners in zones 8 through 10, shift this entire bloom calendar approximately 4 to 6 weeks earlier. Bleeding heart may arrive in late February or early March. Coneflowers may extend their bloom through November. Russian sage may begin flowering in June rather than July. Use the succession framework as your structural guide and adjust the specific timing to match the reality of your regional climate.
Here is my completely honest recommendation after everything we have covered today. If you have never grown perennials before and you want to start with a plant that gives you the fastest establishment, the most forgiving growing requirements, the longest bloom window, and the most immediate visual reward, start with black-eyed Susan or daylily. Both tolerate poor soil. Both handle drought once established. Both multiply and expand on their own over time. Both produce months of color without demanding significant maintenance. And both will make your garden look and feel like a genuinely thriving space, even in your very first season with them. If you have been gardening for years and you want to add plants that will fundamentally change the structure, the depth, and the long-term character of your garden, plant Baptisia and Russian sage this season. Give Baptisia the 3 years it needs without interruption. Put Russian sage in your leanest, driest, most neglected soil and do not enrich it. Both of these plants will reward your patience with a presence and a permanence that no annual flower and no short-lived perennial can ever create in a garden. And if you want a garden that produces something beautiful for pollinators, for birds, for wildlife, and for your own eyes every single month from April through October without requiring daily attention or constant replanting, build your planting plan around all 9 of these plants together using the bloom succession framework we covered. That combination gives you color in every season, wildlife value in every season, and a garden that gets genuinely better, fuller, and more beautiful every single year you leave it in place. Plant them once, take care of them through that first establishment season, and then step back and watch what your garden becomes. If you watched this entire video and found real value in every section we covered, the plant breakdowns, the zone data, the soil preparation, the care calendar, the bloom succession planning, then I want to ask you one final thing directly. Share this video with one person in your life who gardens. One neighbor, one family member, one friend who you know spends money every spring on flowers that do not come back. Send it to them right now, because the information in this video will change how they garden permanently. And that is the kind of thing worth sharing. And if you are still not subscribed to this channel after watching everything we just covered together, I genuinely want to understand why.
This is free. It is here every single week. It is built specifically for gardeners who want real information, real zone data, and real practical guidance that makes every hour they spend in their garden more productive and more rewarding. Hit that subscribe button right now. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. And drop a comment below telling me which of these 9 perennials you are planting first and which USDA zone you are gardening in. Now get out there and plant something permanent.